Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace a single, unbroken line of thought that stretches all the way from ancient Greek philosophers to the AI that's probably in your pocket right now. It's an epic 2,500-year story about how we think, and it all kicks off with one pretty surprising question. So, how on earth could some philosophical argument from 2.5 millennia ago have anything to do with the screen you're looking at right now? I know, it sounds like a massive stretch, but believe it or not, that hidden connection is exactly what we're here to unpack. So here's our roadmap. We're starting way back in ancient Athens with a fundamental debate. Then we'll see how the search for perfect logic kind of hit a brick wall. We'll explore how that failure, believe it or not, gave birth to the modern computer, which led to a whole new set of rules about scale and what's possible. And finally, we'll see how this entire ancient argument is basically playing out right now inside the AI that's changing our world. Okay, let's dive in. Our story really begins with one of the most basic questions you can possibly ask. Why? Why do things happen? And back in ancient Greece, this question of causality lit a fire under two of history's biggest thinkers, Plato and Aristotle. And, well, they came up with two totally different answers. And this right here, this is the core conflict that's going to drive our whole story. On one side, you've got Plato's mind over data, this idea that real truth exists in some perfect, abstract world we can't see. And on the other side, you have Aristotle's data over mind, the belief that real knowledge comes from just looking at the messy real world all around us. For Plato, the world we see and touch, it's all just shadows dancing on a cave wall. The data we collect, it's just a fuzzy, imperfect copy of a truer, ideal reality. To get to the truth, you have to escape the cave of your senses and use pure reason to understand these perfect forms. But Aristotle, he went in the complete opposite direction. He wanted to understand the shadows themselves. He thought knowledge comes from observing the world directly. And crucially, his framework split the efficient cause, the nuts and bolts of how something is made, from the final cause, its ultimate purpose, or why. Now, this was a revolutionary idea because it let science focus on the mechanics of the universe without getting bogged down in questions of ultimate meaning. Okay, now let's jump forward like 2,000 years forward. Aristotle's dream of a perfect system for logical thinking was reaching a fever pitch. Mathematicians were convinced they were this close to building a universal machine for truth. But their grand plan was about to smash headfirst into a very, very old problem. The problem was self-reference. Things that refer to themselves. Take a simple sentence like, "This statement is false." It seems like a simple brain teaser, right? But it creates this crazy, inescapable loop. If the statement is true, then it has to be false. But if it's false, well, then it has to be true. This little word game turned out to be a deep crack in the foundations of logic itself. And then, this mathematician, Kurt Gödel, comes along and basically weaponizes this paradox. He brilliantly created a mathematical statement that, in a nutshell, said of itself, this statement cannot be proven. And this led him to a conclusion that just blew everyone's minds. Gödel proved that any system of logic that's complex enough to do basic arithmetic will always be incomplete. There will always be true statements that the system itself just can't prove. It was a devastating blow to this dream of a perfect, all-knowing mathematical system. And if that wasn't enough, a young Alan Turing came along and delivered the final knockout punch from the world of computation. He proved that some basic questions are just fundamentally unanswerable by any computer program. The most famous one is the halting problem. Basically, you can't write a single program that can look at any other program and tell you for sure if it will ever finish or just run forever. The limits of logic were now set in stone. So, this was a huge crisis, right? This 2,000-year quest for perfect logic had basically failed. But, and this is one of the greatest ironies in all of history, that very failure gave birth to the world we live in today. The very act of trying to prove what a logic machine couldn't do forced people to define, with absolute precision, what a machine was. In trying to map out the limits, they accidentally drew us the blueprint. And this is the magic moment. While trying to prove the halting problem, Turing had to come up with a really clear definition of a computing machine. So he dreamed up this simple, theoretical contraption. But in describing this machine that could read instructions and pretend to be any other machine, he didn't just prove a point about logic's limits. He basically invented the idea of software.
and laid out the conceptual design for every single computer that exists today.
So the second computers became real. The whole game changed. The big question for scientists and engineers was no longer just the theoretical, what is possible? It became the much more practical, economic question of, what can we actually do in a reasonable amount of time? And this brings us to one of the biggest, most famous, unsolved problems in all of science. One with a $1 million prize attached, P versus NP. To put it simply, it asks this: if checking the answer to a problem is easy, does that automatically mean that finding the answer is also easy? Think of it like a Sudoku puzzle. Checking a finished grid to see if it's correct, that's super fast. A computer can do it instantly. That's an NP problem. But actually solving a really tough Sudoku from a blank grid, that can take an incredibly long time. Now, if P equals NP, it would mean there's some secret, fast way to solve all these hard problems, which would change everything from medicine to cybersecurity. Most experts think they're not equal, but nobody, and I mean nobody, can prove it. And beyond these abstract problems, there are hard physical limits too. Amdahl's law is a fundamental rule in computing. You can think of it like a highway. You can add more and more lanes to get more cars through, but if they all have to funnel through a single toll booth at the end, that toll booth becomes your bottleneck. No matter how many processors you throw at a task, you're always going to be limited by the parts that just have to be done one after the other. Which brings us right up to the present day, because right now, the world of AI is completely dominated by a shockingly simple, almost brute force idea: the scaling laws. These are basically observations that show for these huge AI models, their performance just gets predictably better the more data you feed them, the bigger you make them, and the more computing power you throw at them. For now, it seems bigger really is just better.
And this is it. This is where we come full circle. The mind-blowing success of modern AI built on just unimaginable amounts of data and raw compute power is the ultimate win for Aristotle's data over mind philosophy. We're building intelligence not from pure abstract logic, but from finding the patterns buried in all the world's data. But, of course, this amazing triumph brings those old, ancient paradoxes roaring back, just in a new, high-tech form. If we manage to create an intelligence that's truly smarter than us, we run into the impossible machine paradox. I mean, how can we design something whose ability to design is better than our own? And that leads to the self-design loop, a totally mind-bending idea, where the machine starts designing its own, even smarter successors over and over again. You know, Alan Turing, the guy who basically architected this whole new world, he saw this coming. He knew that this whole quest to build a thinking machine, it wasn't just about building a machine. It was really a journey to figure out how our own minds actually work. So that great debate that started in the schools of Athens, the clash between Plato's perfect abstract world and Aristotle's messy real-world data, is no longer just an exercise for philosophers. It is an engineering problem being solved in labs and data centers all over the planet. Which really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. As we pour all of our knowledge, all of our language, and all of our biases into these incredible machines, are we really creating some brand new form of intelligence? Or is our greatest invention just a mirror? One that's finally forcing us, after 2,500 years, to truly understand ourselves?